We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling. We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling. We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling. We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever felt like you needed a shortcut to understanding something truly massive, something that impacts nearly every facet of American life, but, it's buried in thousands of pages of legislative text? We're talking about a document so comprehensive it touches everything from your grocery bill to national defense strategies, from how you pay for college to the very structure of our tax system. Well, today, we're taking a deep dive into exactly that kind of document.
Indeed. We have before us the full text of H.R. 11, formerly known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And this isn't just any piece of legislation. It's a specific and pretty powerful legislative tool known as a reconciliation bill. So that means it's designed to make significant, often sweeping changes to federal spending, revenue, and debt limits. Our mission today is, well, to go beyond just reciting facts. We aim to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and maybe some surprising insights from this extensive material, helping you grasp not just what's inside, but why it matters to you and what its broader implications could be.
That's right. Think of us as your expert guides, kind of navigating the often dense language of Capitol Hill, translating the legalese into those crucial aha moments. This bill, reported by Mr. Arrington from the Committee on the Budget, is truly a legislative behemoth. It touches on an incredible array of topics. You mentioned nutrition, national defense, student loans, energy policy, even, believe it or not, how you might pay for your car in the future. So what does this all mean for you, the learner striving to be well-informed in, well, a world of information overload? Let's find out.
We'll explore key provisions across various titles of the bill, highlighting significant proposed changes, their effective dates, and the potential implications as described within the text itself. Our goal is to provide a clear, impartial understanding of the bill's contents, allowing you to quickly become well-informed on its wide-ranging proposals, giving you, a firm grasp of the forest, even if we dip into the details of a few specific trees.
Okay, first off, let's set the stage. We hear the name the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. What exactly is this, and why the big and maybe beautiful moniker? Beyond the catchy name, what makes H.R. 11 such a significant piece of legislation?
Well, the HR in H.R. 11, that just stands for House Resolution. It means it started in the House of Representatives. Simple enough, but the big part, it really lives up to its name. The bill itself states its purpose is to provide for reconciliation pursuant to Title II of
We do a little trolling. It's called We do a little trolling.
Now, what does reconciliation mean in this context? It's a special legislative process.
Yeah.
It allows certain budget-related legislation to pass the Senate
We
with
do a
just
little
simple
trolling.
majority
It's
rather
called
than
We
the
do a
usual
little trolling.
60-vote threshold needed to, overcome a filibuster.
Ah, okay, so it's a procedural shortcut, in a way.
Exactly. It makes it a very powerful tool for enacting significant policy changes tied to federal spending, revenue, and the debt ceiling. What makes this particular reconciliation bill so big is just how comprehensive it is. It's not a single issue piece of legislation at all. This bill is a sprawling package touching on no fewer than 11 different committee areas, from agriculture all the way to Ways and Means. It covers an incredibly diverse set of federal programs and policies. It's really designed to be a sweeping overhaul, a true legislative omnibus, which is, why we're giving it this in-depth treatment today.
Right. So it's not just a single issue bill. It's more like a legislative omnibus.
Yeah.
Designed to be potentially fast-tracked through Congress because of that reconciliation status. And just look at the sheer volume and the table of contents. You can immediately see it covers an incredible amount of ground, almost every aspect of federal policy. Let's dive into some of the most impactful areas, starting with what's covered under the Committee on Agriculture. That's Title I of this bill. All right, kicking us off, Title I covers the Committee on Agriculture, and right away we see some pretty notable changes to nutrition programs and farm policy. For our listeners, what's standing out here, particularly regarding how federal food assistance might change?
Okay, starting with nutrition. A foundational change is proposed to the Thrifty Food Plan in Section 1011. Now, this plan, for those maybe unfamiliar, it's the basis for calculating food stamp benefits officially, SNAP benefits, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It's designed to represent a low-cost, nutritious diet for different household sizes, and, any adjustments to it can directly impact the benefit levels for millions of Americans who rely on SNAP.
Okay, so changes to that base calculation.
Exactly. Beyond that, there are significant revisions to the able-bodied adults without dependents work requirements, often called ABLWD requirements for the Food and Nutrition Act of 2008. That's in Section 1002. The bill proposes amending Section 6.3 to clearly define exceptions for these work requirements. Specifically, individuals under 18 or over 65, those medically certified as physically or mentally unfit for employment, or parents with a dependent child under 7 years of age, they would be exempt. But it also
We do a
includes
little
a sunset
trolling. It's
provision.
called We do a
It
little
states
trolling.
that certain other existing exceptions, beyond these new ones, will cease to have effect on October 1st, 2030. This signals a pretty clear intent to tighten the criteria for receiving benefits for able-bodied adults without dependents, potentially shifting more individuals into work or work training programs to maintain their eligibility.
So the bill is aiming for stricter definitions around who needs to work to receive benefits while still providing some, key exemptions. That sounds like a significant policy shift. What about how states manage these requirements? How might that impact beneficiaries?
Well, Section 1003 amends the existing rules about able-bodied adults without dependents waivers. It seems to give states specific, maybe more stringent parameters for requesting and receiving these waivers from the federal government. Traditionally, states have used these waivers in areas with high unemployment or, not enough jobs, but this bill seems to be limiting that flexibility. And Section 1004 addresses a rather granular but potentially impactful detail: the availability of standard utility allowances based on receipt of energy assistance. This modifies how utility allowances are calculated for households receiving third-party energy assistance, like from LIHEAP, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program.
Okay.
Crucially, it creates a differentiation between households with and without an elderly or disabled member. This means the rules for counting utility costs when determining food assistance eligibility would be more tailored. It could impact benefit levels for different household compositions. And while it aims to prevent a household from sort of double dipping on utility benefits if they're already getting energy assistance.
Interesting. So even the seemingly smaller details like utility allowances are getting a fine-tooth comb. It highlights a push for maybe precision in benefit calculation. And I see something about internet expenses, too. That feels like a relatively new area for federal assistance programs.
You're right, it is. Section 1005 includes restrictions on internet expenses related to the federal share of allotment costs. For fiscal years 2026 and 2027, the federal share for these expenses is set at 100%. So the federal government covers the full cost initially.
Okay.
However, this then drops to 95% for fiscal year 2028 and each fiscal year after that. This isn't just a minor tweak, it implies a planned shift in financial responsibility over time. States would eventually need to pick up a larger portion of the internet-related support within these nutrition programs that could potentially impact state budgets and, how these services are delivered down the line.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to the farming side of agriculture. What changes are proposed for commodity prices, which are such a critical safety net for farmers and for crop insurance?
Yeah, the bill specifies new, revised reference prices for a wide range of covered commodities. These are effective beginning with the 2031 crop year. That's in Section 1101. These reference prices, they're essentially a floor price, right? If market prices fall below this level, farmers become eligible for federal payments. To give you a sense of the detail, the text lists wheat at $6.35 per bushel, corn at $4.10, soybeans at $10 per bushel, even peanuts at $630 per ton, among many others. These detailed adjustments would significantly impact that financial safety net for farmers across different agricultural sectors. There are also detailed provisions about allocation of base acres for farms. That's how the government determines a farm's historical planting history for aid purposes. This allocation would consider planted acreage during the 2019-2023 crop years for covered commodities, and also any acreage prevented from planting during that period due to natural disasters like drought or flood. Notably, farms that didn't plant covered commodities for commercial harvest during this period, they'd be ineligible for new base acre allocation. That could impact newer farming operations.
That's quite specific, really setting the stage for future agricultural support. And I see a particular focus on crop insurance as well, with a new pilot program.
We do a little
It sounds like
trolling.
maybe
It's
a
called
novel
we do a little
approach
trolling.
to agricultural risk management.
Yes, that's a particularly notable and innovative provision. It's the Poultry Insurance Pilot
We do a little
Program in
trolling.
Section
It's called we do a little
1107.
trolling.
This program mandates the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation, that's an agency within the USDA, to establish index-based insurance for contract poultry growers. We're talking growers of broilers and laying hens, specifically against extreme weather events. The program is set to begin in 2026.
Index-based insurance for poultry. Okay, yeah.
It's a significant expansion of what federal crop insurance typically covers. Instead of just protecting against crop loss, this moves into protecting livestock producers against weather impacts, specifically for those operating under contracts where their income might be tied to performance metrics affected by extreme heat or cold. It's definitely a novel approach to risk management in a specific agricultural sector, reflecting maybe an evolving understanding of climate risks for different types of farming.
So targeted relief and new financial tools specifically for poultry farmers. What about broader conservation efforts or rural community support in this title?
The bill does extend funding for the Voluntary Public Access and Habitat Incentive Program, that's Section 101 SAB. It allocates an additional $10 million for each fiscal year from 2025 through 2031. This program incentivizes private landowners to allow public access to their lands for, hunting, fishing, other recreation, while also promoting habitat conservation. It also extends the Feral Swine Eradication and Control Pilot Program, which is important for managing invasive species that can cause, significant damage to agricultural lands and ecosystems. Furthermore, there are extensions for the Secure Rural Schools and Community Self-Determination Act, that's Section 11107G. This act provides crucial financial assistance to rural counties that contain large areas of federal lands, basically compensating them for the tax revenue limitations due to those lands. The bill extends various authorities under this act to 2028 and 2029, which directly impacts funding stability for many counties across the country that rely on these payments for schools and other essential services.
It really seems to cover the spectrum of agricultural and rural policy, from individual assistance and commodity support to new insurance mechanisms and funding for rural communities. It's clear this title aims to reshape how federal support is provided and managed in these vital areas, with an eye towards both economic stability and maybe environmental stewardship. Okay, moving from the fields to the battlefield, Title II of the bill focuses squarely on national security. What are the key budgetary and strategic shifts proposed in this section that our listeners should be aware of?
Well, Title II details significant financial allocations and also some rescissions related to national defense. It reflects what appears to be a very clear strategic priority. One key area is substantial appropriations for missile development and production. That's in Section 2012. For example, the bill allocates $70 million for Navy and Marine Corps anti-ship missiles, $100 million for Army ballistic missile anti-ship seekers, and $175 million for next-generation Army medium-range ballistic missiles.
There's also $50 million for mitigating diminishing manufacturing sources for medium-range air-to-air missiles, and a big one, $350 million for production of Navy long-range air and missile defense interceptors. What's fascinating here is that this isn't just, a routine budget increase. These are very specific, large investments in advanced strike capabilities and missile defense. It signals a strategic pivot towards enhancing certain types of offensive and defensive weaponry, maybe in the face of evolving global threats.
Here's where it gets really interesting. A significant investment in modern missile technology, that's clear. Are there any other major areas of defense spending or modernization outlined in this title, beyond just the weapons themselves?
Yes, absolutely. Beyond just new hardware, there's a strong emphasis on modernizing defense infrastructure and processes, particularly through adopting cutting-edge technology. The bill appropriates $200 million for deploying automation and artificial intelligence to accelerate financial statement audits of the Department of Defense. That's Section 2013.
Using AI for DoD audits.
Exactly. It points to a direct and frankly ambitious effort to improve efficiency, accuracy, and accountability within DoD finances, leveraging AI for what has historically been a very manual, complex, and let's be honest, often problematic process. It's sort of an acknowledgement that even the Pentagon needs to embrace modern tech for its internal operations.
Right.
Additionally, there's $10 million for improving the overall budgetary and programmatic infrastructure of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, sort of underscoring a commitment to foundational financial management and planning.
That's a fascinating detail, using AI for auditing the Pentagon.
Yeah.
It really speaks to a broader trend of leveraging technology for government efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
What about military construction? Are new facilities or housing addressed?
Yes, definitely. Military construction projects authorized in Section 2014, it specifies authorized appropriations for various construction projects across different branches. This ensures that the physical infrastructure supporting military operations and personnel is maintained and upgraded. There are also specific provisions for temporary authority for acquisition or construction of privatized military unaccompanied housing. That's Section 2011. This aims to ensure adequate and modern living facilities for military personnel who aren't accompanied by family, addressing a really critical aspect of troop welfare and readiness.
So a clear blend of traditional defense spending on new weaponry, high-tech modernization of internal processes, and critical infrastructure improvements for personnel. If we connect this to the bigger picture, what would you say is the overarching theme or strategic aim of Title II?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Title II seems to reflect a strategic shift towards not just maintaining but significantly enhancing advanced military capabilities, particularly in missile defense and offensive systems. At the same time, it pushes for greater financial transparency and efficiency through technology adoption within the Department of Defense. This combination underscores a commitment to both traditional and next-generation defense needs, with a keen focus on accountability and modernizing internal operations, recognizing that a strong defense isn't just about what you build, but also how efficiently you manage it.
Okay, let's turn our attention now to what affects millions of American families directly: education. Title III covers the Committee on Education and the Workforce. From what we've seen, this section proposes some major reforms, especially regarding student aid. What are the most impactful changes proposed here for students and their families?
Yeah, this section indeed contains some of the most impactful changes for students and their families trying to navigate the complex world of higher education financing. Starting July 1st, 2026, the bill revises the fundamental definitions of undergraduate student, graduate student, and professional student for federal financial aid purposes. That's laid out in Section 300031. These definitions are foundational, right? Because they determine eligibility for various types and amounts of federal student aid. So any change here can have ripple effects. Crucially, and this is a really significant point for many families, it introduces new and substantial limits on federal direct PLUS loans.
PLUS loans. Okay.
Yeah, these are often a critical source of funding, especially for parents helping dependent students pay for college.
New limits on PLUS loans. That sounds huge. How exactly would that work, and what could be the practical implications for families who've traditionally relied on these loans?
Okay, so under the proposed changes, effective July 1st, 2026, the maximum annual amount a parent can borrow on behalf of a dependent student will be limited. It's capped at the cost of attendance for that specific student, minus the maximum annual federal direct unsubsidized Stafford loans that student may borrow. But here's the truly substantial shift. The aggregate amount a parent can borrow in PLUS loans is capped at $50,000, period, regardless of the number of dependent students for whom that parent borrows. That's in Section 300031B2.
Wow. Okay, $50,000 total. Lifetime cap per parent.
Exactly. It's a dramatic departure from previous policy, which often allowed parents to borrow up to the full cost of attendance for each child year after year. This new $50,000 lifetime cap per parent could fundamentally change how many families approach college financing. It might force them to seek alternative funding sources or, frankly, reconsider more expensive institutions.
So, no more unlimited PLUS loans up to the cost of attendance and that lifetime cap per parent. That could dramatically change how families approach college financing, potentially leading to significant financial adjustments. What about repayment for these loans? Does the bill offer any flexibility there, or does it tighten up on that front as well?
Well, this raises an important question, especially given the new limits. The bill mandates that for new loans issued on or after July 1st, 2026, if a borrower has an accepted loan, which is specifically defined as a direct PLUS loan for a dependent student, or a consolidation loan that includes such a PLUS loan, they will be required to repay all outstanding loans under the standard repayment plan.
Required standard repayment.
Required standard repayment. That's in Section 300031-3. This is a really significant shift away from the current availability of income-driven repayment options for these specific loan types. Those options previously offered more flexibility based on a borrower's income and family size. For those with PLUS loans, this means a more rigid repayment schedule, pretty much regardless of their post-graduation income.
That's a major detail that listeners should be acutely aware of, especially parents considering PLUS loans. It sounds like a definite stick with that required standard repayment. Does the bill offer any carrot in terms of other repayment assistance? Maybe for distressed borrowers or those struggling with other types of student debt?
Yes, it does offer a kind of counterbalance. It proposes a repayment assistance plan in Section 300031-day. This includes an interest subsidy for loans made on or after July 1st, 2026, and a balance assistance component specifically for distressed borrowers. This balance assistance is tied to adjusted gross income, or AGI, and a tiered repayment percentage. For instance, it's 0% of AGI for those with AGI less than $10,000, rising incrementally up to 10% for AGI over $100,000.
Right.
This could lead to a reduction in the principal balance if monthly payments based on income are low relative to the original loan amount. So while PLUS loans face stricter repayment rules, other federal loans might see new forms of income-tiered assistance. It creates sort of a dual approach to managing student debt.
That's an interesting combination. Stricter repayment for PLUS loans, but income-tiered assistance for others. Now, what about promise grants and student price guarantees? That sounds intriguing, almost like the bill is trying to tackle the issue of rising college costs head-on.
This is a truly new concept introduced in the bill, detailed in Section 30032, and it does aim directly at that core problem of unpredictable college costs. For award year 2028, 2029, and succeeding years, promise grants would be awarded to eligible institutions that provide a maximum total price guarantee for programs of study.
A price guarantee?
A price guarantee. And this isn't just some vague promise. This guarantee must be clearly published on the institution's website and marketing materials. It applies for a minimum guarantee period, which is tied to the average completion time for the program. The intent here seems to be to bring unprecedented predictability and transparency to college costs for students and families, so they know exactly what they'll pay for a degree program from start to finish, hopefully removing the fear of those year-over-year tuition hikes.
A literal price guarantee for college. That is a fascinating and potentially game-changing concept for families. How do institutions qualify for these grants? And what happens if students don't complete their programs or, if the education doesn't lead to good outcomes?
Right, that's where the accountability piece comes in. Institutions have to meet specific requirements, including verifying student income and family size to ensure the grants target the intended beneficiaries. The bill also introduces a novel completion and earnings-based reimbursement percentage, that's in Section 30031E, for completing student cohorts, meaning groups of students who successfully earn their degree or credential, if the median value-added earnings are negative.
Value-added earnings?
Yeah, that's basically the earnings students gain because of their education, after accounting for factors like their prior experience and demographics. So if those median value-added earnings are negative, the institution's reimbursement percentage is 100%. Conversely, if median value-added earnings exceed the total price of the program, it's 0%. For non-completing student cohorts, the reimbursement percentage is tied to completion rates and other factors. It could potentially penalize institutions for low completion rates. This reflects a very significant shift towards holding institutions accountable for student outcomes, directly linking federal financial aid to measurable metrics like completion rates, and crucially, post-graduation earnings.
So, linking federal funds directly to student success metrics like completion and earnings, it's a clear signal that the Department of Education is looking for maybe a return on investment for federal aid dollars. What about regulatory relief in this title? Are there efforts to reduce the bureaucratic burden on institutions?
Yes, that's another key component here. Subtitle F, Section 30051, provides for regulatory relief, and Subtitle G, Section 30061, specifies a limitation on authority of the Secretary to propose or issue regulations and executive actions. This limitation applies specifically if new regulations are economically significant and would increase the subsidy costs. This suggests a strong intent to curb new regulations from the Department of Education that might add financial burdens or administrative costs to federal programs or the institutions that administer them, aiming for maybe a more streamlined and less costly regulatory environment overall.
That's a lot to digest for higher education. It really seems this bill wants to shake up the entire system, from how student loans are structured and repaid to how institutions are held accountable for outcomes, and even the regulatory environment they operate in. It's a comprehensive push for affordability, predictability, and accountability. Now let's talk about two critical areas that affect pretty much everyone: energy and healthcare. Title IV, under the Committee on Energy and Commerce, proposes significant and often contentious changes. What are the big moves on the energy front that our listeners should be aware of?
Okay, on the energy side, a primary focus seems to be on fiscal adjustments. Section 41000U1 signals a clear intent to rescind, basically, take back funds from programs established under the Inflation Reduction Act.
Rolling back IRA funds.
Yeah. Exactly. This means a rollback of previously allocated funds for certain energy initiatives that were part of that earlier legislation, which had aimed to incentivize clean energy. Beyond that, there are detailed provisions in Section 41002 for FERC certificates and fees for certain energy infrastructure at international boundaries. FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, typically reviews and approves energy infrastructure projects. This bill introduces an expedited review process for projects like cross-border pipelines or transmission lines, and it requires applicants to pay a fee for the review.
Expedited review.
Yes, and crucially, it sets a one-year deadline for federal authorization approvals, with a possible 6-month extension if the applicant consents. This is designed to significantly speed up approvals for energy infrastructure that crosses national borders.
Expedited review for cross-border energy projects, that's a clear direction, emphasizing a faster path for certain energy developments. And how does the bill address natural gas exports and imports? That's a hot topic in global energy markets.
Section 41003 directly addresses natural gas exports and imports, specifically regarding natural gas pipeline facilities, hydrogen transportation, and hazardous liquid pipeline facilities. It outlines a streamlined process for FERC to issue licenses for such facilities. The emphasis here is on timely consideration and significantly judicial preclusion for certain actions related to these licenses.
Judicial preclusion, meaning fewer lawsuits.
Essentially, yes. It means there would be less opportunity for delays from legal challenges to these critical energy infrastructure projects once they have been approved by FERC. The underlying goal appears to be facilitating the flow of energy resources, potentially increasing domestic energy exports and maybe bolstering energy independence.
So, streamlining infrastructure approval and potentially boosting domestic energy exports. What about the rather unique and maybe somewhat controversial de-risking program that this bill proposes for energy projects? It sounds like a new form of government backing.
Yeah, you've hit on a fascinating and novel aspect there. The bill establishes a de-risking program for covered energy projects in Section 41004. This is quite unique because it's designed to mitigate financial risks for private energy project sponsors. Here's how it works. Sponsors would pay a one-time enrollment fee of 5% of their capital contribution to the project.
Okay, an enrollment fee.
Right, and then annual premiums of 1.5%. In turn, if a covered event occurs, defined, for example, as a court order halting construction for over 180 days, which can be devastating for a project's finances, the Secretary would provide compensation. That compensation is limited to 50% of the sponsor's capital contribution. This program is funded through a de-risking compensation fund, which is available until September 30, 2034, with a 3% limit on administrative expenses. It's an explicit mechanism for the federal government to act as a financial backstop for certain types of delays or cancellations. The aim seems to be making large-scale energy projects more attractive to private investment by reducing their exposure to regulatory or legal hurdles.
That's a very specific mechanism to mitigate financial risk for energy projects. An interesting blend of private investment and public backstop designed to accelerate development. Now let's pivot to healthcare, particularly Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, or ACA, exchanges. These touch so many American lives. What are the major proposed changes here?
This is indeed a very detailed and impactful part of the bill. Under Medicaid, specifically Part 1, Subpart A, there are new Medicaid provider screening requirements. That's Section 44106. This mandates that states regularly check the Death Master file, not just for enrolled individuals, but also for providers, to determine if any provider is deceased. It's a common fraud prevention measure.
Right.
It also removes the good faith waiver for payment reduction related to certain erroneous excess payments in Section 44107 starting in fiscal year 2030. That indicates a stricter approach to financial accountability for states regarding federal Medicaid funds.
So a focus on reducing fraud and improving payment accuracy in Medicaid. What about eligibility redeterminations? That's a key process for ensuring the program serves its intended population.
The bill increases the frequency of eligibility redeterminations for certain individuals. It requires states to redetermine eligibility at least twice annually in Section 44108 rather than less frequently, as is sometimes done. Most significantly, Section 44110 aims to prohibit federal financial participation under Medicaid and CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program, for individuals without verified citizenship, nationality, or satisfactory immigration status.
Wow, okay, that's a big change.
It's a profound change. It would eliminate the state requirement to provide medical assistance during what's called the reasonable opportunity period for documentation. That means individuals without immediate proof could potentially lose access to care very quickly. It also reduces the expansion FMAP, or Federal Medical Assistance Percentage, for certain states providing payments for health care furnished to specific individuals. That could reduce the federal share of costs for states that have expanded Medicaid under the ACA.
That's a big one. Directly tying eligibility more closely to immigration status and potentially reducing federal matching funds for states. Any other significant changes or new restrictions in Medicaid that stand out?
Yes, there's a proposed moratorium on implementation of rule relating to staffing standards for long-term care facilities under the Medicare and Medicaid programs. That's Section 44121. This moratorium would last until January 1st, 2035. It effectively halts a significant May 2024 rule from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services on nursing home staffing, which was designed to improve quality of care.
A moratorium on nursing home staffing.
We do a little trolling.
Okay,
It's called
yeah.
we do
It's a
little
direct
trolling.
counter to recent regulatory efforts aimed at nursing home quality. The bill also includes detailed provisions for ensuring accurate payments to pharmacies under Medicaid in Section 44123. It requires monthly surveys of national average drug acquisition costs for non-retail pharmacies and imposes penalties for non-compliance. This aims for greater transparency and fairness in drug pricing within Medicaid.
A moratorium on nursing home staffing standards that's definitely a direct counter to recent regulatory efforts and one that will certainly generate discussion. And now, something about abusive spread pricing for prescription drugs. What's that about?
Section 44124 addresses preventing the use of abusive spread pricing in Medicaid. This is a direct response to concerns about pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs. The bill requires transparent prescription drug pass-through pricing from PBMs to covered entities. It disallows federal matching payments for certain markups and fees. The goal here is to increase transparency and reduce costs related to drug acquisition by ensuring PBMs cannot profit excessively from the difference between what they charge states and what they pay pharmacies, a practice often called spread pricing. It's really a move to ensure more federal dollars go directly to patient care and less to those intermediaries.
That seems like a direct response to concerns about PBM practices and drug pricing transparency. And then there's a highly specific and for many quite controversial provision about gender transition procedures.
Yes, Section 44131 directly states that no funds provided under such a plan shall be used to make payments to a prohibited entity for items and services furnished during the 10-year period beginning on the date of the enactment of this act for gender transition procedures. A prohibited entity is defined very broadly to include not just the entity itself, but its affiliates, subsidiaries, successors, and clinics.
Okay.
The bill then goes into significant detail, specifying a broad list of services that would be excluded. This includes medical and surgical interventions that intentionally change the body of such individual to no longer correspond to the individual's sex. It lists things like castration, sterilization, hysterectomy, phalloplasty, vaginoplasty, mastectomy, as well as hormone therapy and puberty blockers. It's a very clear and explicit restriction on the use of federal funds within Medicaid for these procedures.
That's a very clear and explicit exclusion of certain procedures from federal funding with a broad definition of what constitutes a gender transition procedure.
Right.
What else on the healthcare front? Perhaps around personal accountability for Medicaid recipients.
Yes. Subpart D of the Medicaid section, specifically Section 44141, introduces a significant requirement for states to establish Medicaid community engagement requirements for certain individuals, unquote. This mandates that states, by July 4th, 2026, implement community engagement requirements for applicable individuals generally, those eligible under the ACA expansion, to maintain Medicaid eligibility.
Community engagement, like work requirements.
Essentially, yes. These requirements can be met through employment, active job search, participation in education or job training, community service, or even providing care for a family member for at least 80 hours per month. There are exceptions provided for children, pregnant women, caregivers of very young children, or incapacitated individuals, those medically frail, or inmates. States must verify compliance at redetermination, and non-compliance could lead to termination of eligibility after a 30-day grace period. And crucially, the bill explicitly prohibits waivers of these community engagement requirements under Section 1115. That's a significant departure from previous federal flexibility on such matters.
So introducing work requirements for Medicaid, similar to some of the SNAP changes we discussed earlier, and blocking states from waiving them. That is a major policy shift. And what about cost sharing for individuals who gained eligibility through the ACA expansion?
Section 44142 modifies cost-sharing requirements for certain expansion individuals under the Medicaid program beginning October 1st, 2028. For specified individuals, those eligible under ACA expansion with family income exceeding the poverty line states are required to impose deductions, cost-sharing, or similar charges that are greater than $0.
Required cost sharing.
Yes. This is a significant change, as current law often limits or entirely prohibits such charges for this group. The intent seems to be increasing personal financial responsibility for some beneficiaries.
Okay, moving to the Affordable Care Act exchanges, or ACA exchanges, in Part 2 of this title. What changes are proposed for how people enroll and how their income is verified for subsidies?
Section 44201 directly addresses what the bill terms waste, fraud, and abuse in the ACA exchanges. It changes enrollment periods by striking broad secretarial authority for special enrollment periods. This makes it potentially more difficult for individuals to enroll outside of the standard annual open enrollment period, aiming to streamline the process.
Okay, tightening enrollment periods.
Right. It also adds stricter rules for verifying income for individuals enrolling in a qualified health plan through an exchange. That's in Section 44201B. For plan years beginning January 1st, 2026, if there's a specified income discrepancy, for example, if the income someone attests to is much higher than data from Treasury or Social Security, say by 10% or more, the exchange is required to verify the income before providing subsidies or determining eligibility.
Upfront income verification.
Exactly. This aims to reduce erroneous or fraudulent subsidy payments.
So a tightening of the enrollment and verification process for ACA subsidies, putting the onus more heavily on applicants to ensure their stated income matches federal records. And I see another change related to gender transition procedures, this time within the ACA exchanges.
Yes, Section 44202 directly states that for plan years beginning on or after January 1st, 2027, the essential health benefits defined pursuant to paragraph 1 may not include items and services furnished for a gender transition procedure. This applies to private health insurance plans offered through the ACA exchanges. It effectively removes these procedures from the mandatory coverage that plans must provide to be certified on the exchange.
Okay.
The definition of gender transition procedure is explicitly outlined, similar to the Medicaid exclusion we just discussed. It includes various surgeries and medical interventions for the purpose of intentionally changing the body of such individual to no longer correspond to the individual's sex. However, it notably includes exceptions for procedures to alleviate a physical disorder or to provide care for individuals with a disorder of sexual development or who are intersex.
This bill certainly seems to be taking a consistent stance on this issue across different federal health programs and now private insurance provided through the ACA. What about Medicare and other payment integrity efforts for older Americans?
Section 44203 modifies the Medicare physician fee schedule update for 2026 and subsequent years. It sets it at 75% of the estimated percentage increase in the Medicare Economic Index. That's in Section 44203B. This could impact physician reimbursement rates, potentially leading to lower increases over time.
Lower updates for doctors.
Potentially, yes. There are also extensive provisions regarding agreements with pharmacy benefit managers for Medicare Part D prescription drug plans. That's Section 44204. It mandates that PBMs, similar to the Medicaid changes, cannot have income other than a bona fide service fee, and they must provide detailed reports to PDP sponsors and the Secretary by July 1 of each year, beginning in 2028. This includes highly detailed information on drug prices, rebates, discounts, payment methods.
More PBM transparency.
A lot more. PBMs must also allow for independent audits and cannot restrict the auditor selection. These measures are a major push to increase transparency and accountability in the PBM industry within Medicare, specifically targeting practices like spread pricing and ensuring drug costs are managed efficiently.
It sounds like a major push for transparency and cost control in how prescription drugs are managed in Medicare, affecting both beneficiaries and the pharmaceutical supply chain. The scale of changes in this Energy and Commerce title alone, covering both critical energy policy and sweeping healthcare reforms, is quite breathtaking. Let's shift our focus now to Homeland Security, a topic that's, well, consistently in the headlines. Title VI and certain sections of Title VII deal extensively with border security and immigration policy. Given the current national conversation, what specific investments and policy changes are proposed here?
This part of the bill makes truly substantial appropriations for border security. It signals a very direct and large-scale investment. Section 6001 allocates a massive $46.5 billion for construction, installation, or improvement of primary waterborne and secondary barriers.
$46.5 billion.
Yes. Plus access roads and barrier system attributes like cameras, lights, sensors, and other detection technology. This is a comprehensive investment in physical and technological border infrastructure across the southern border. Additionally, a specific allocation of $50 million is appropriated for eradication and removal of invasive plant species like chrysocane and salt cedar, which often impede visibility and access for border security efforts along the Rio Grande.
That's an enormous sum directed towards physical and technological border infrastructure, really emphasizing physical barriers and advanced surveillance. What about personnel and vehicle upgrades for those on the ground?
The bill doesn't just focus on static infrastructure. It also appropriates $2 billion for U.S. Customs and Border Protection personnel and fleet vehicles. That's in Section 6002. This indicates a significant increase in staffing and operational resources for frontline agents.
Okay.
Furthermore, $250 million is allocated for U.S. Customs and Border Protection technology, the National Vetting Center, and maritime surveillance equipment. That's Section 6003. There's even a specific definition of autonomous systems referring to integrated software and hardware using AI to identify items of interest that would otherwise be manually identified by personnel. It highlights a tech-forward approach to enhancing agent efficiency and coverage across vast border areas.
So, a comprehensive approach to border security, combining physical barriers, advanced technology, and increased personnel. It's a significant investment in a multifaceted strategy. What about processing immigrants, particularly regarding new fees and detention capacity?
Sections 7002 and 7003 introduce new fees that could directly impact individuals seeking entry or work authorization. A border crossing fee of $25 is imposed on individuals entering the United States without specific immigration documentation, though there are exceptions for certain groups like Cubans or those granted parole for law enforcement matters.
A $25 border crossing fee?
Yes, and an employment authorization document fee of $50 is imposed on asylum applicants, again with exemptions for unaccompanied alien children and certain other vulnerable categories. These new fees mark a clear change in policy, intending to place more of the financial burden of processing on those seeking entry or asylum.
New fees for entry and work authorization, that's a clear change in policy with direct financial implications for migrants. And you mentioned a massive appropriation for detention. How does that fit into the broader strategy?
Indeed. Section 70101 appropriates a staggering $45 billion to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, for fiscal year 2025. These funds remain available until September 30th, 2029.
$45 billion for ICE detention.
Yes. These funds are specifically dedicated to increasing family residential center capacity and single adult alien detention capacity. This signals a clear intent to significantly expand detention capabilities. The bill also states that detention standards for single adult capacity shall be set in the sole discretion of the Secretary of Homeland Security. That's Section 70101E. It grants significant authority over these conditions, which is a notable shift in oversight. This immense investment suggests a strategy that really prioritizes detention as a primary tool for managing migration flows.
That's a staggering amount of money dedicated to increasing detention capacity, along with that focus on secretarial discretion for standards. What about state and local cooperation with federal immigration efforts? Does the bill address so-called sanctuary city policies?
Section 70102 directly addresses that. It prohibits the use of federal funds to compensate any state or political subdivision that prohibits or in any way restricts federal, state, or local government entities from complying with immigration laws, assisting federal law enforcement, or sharing information regarding citizenship or immigration status.
So tying funds to cooperation.
Exactly. It aims to enforce cooperation at local levels, effectively discouraging or penalizing sanctuary city-type policies that might limit local law enforcement's ability to assist federal immigration authorities. It's a clear move to ensure a unified approach to immigration enforcement across all levels.
We do a little trolling. It's called.
And what about unaccompanied alien children, or UACs? That's a particularly sensitive and complex area of immigration policy. How does the bill propose to handle them?
The bill includes several provisions related to UACs. Those are minors who arrive at the border without a parent or legal guardian. Section 7011C mandates that U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, shall conduct criminal record checks and examination for gang-related tattoos and other gang-related markings for UACs upon apprehension.
Okay.
Section 7011C applies similar requirements to the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, once UACs are transferred to their care. Most extensively, Section 7011 requires HHS to provide Homeland Security with detailed information about UAC sponsors and all adult residents of their household.
All adult resident.
Yes, including names, social security numbers, dates of birth, validated residence, immigration status, contact information, and results of all background and criminal records checks, including sex offender registry and fingerprint-based national criminal history checks. This is a significant increase in data sharing and scrutiny for those sponsoring UACs.
Wow.
Finally, Section 70119 provides specific funding for repatriation efforts for UACs, emphasizing a goal of returning these children to their home countries.
So a clear emphasis on expanded information sharing and scrutiny for UACs and their sponsors, alongside a push for repatriation. It seems this bill intends to significantly reshape immigration enforcement and processing, with a focus on increasing deterrence and control at the border. Let's pivot now to the mechanics of government itself, how regulations are made and how the federal workforce operates. Title VIII addresses regulatory reform, and Title IX focuses on oversight and government reform. What's in store here for the bureaucratic machinery of Washington?
Well, Title VIII introduces significant and quite impactful changes to regulatory processes. It seems aimed at reining in the executive branch's rulemaking authority. Section 8001 adds new, stringent requirements for agencies when proposing or issuing a rule. They would now need to conduct much more detailed analysis. Things like explicit consideration of economic effects, potential job creation or loss, inflationary impacts, and a clear statement of constitutional authority for the rule.
More upfront analysis required.
Exactly. And critically, major rules that increase revenues, that's Section 810, they will not take effect unless Congress enacts a joint resolution of approval.
Congressional approval for major revenue rules.
Yes, this is a substantial shift. It gives Congress explicit approval power over certain revenue-generating regulations, which could significantly slow down or even halt new rules, making the regulatory process much more legislative-driven.
That's a huge shift in power from the executive to the legislative branch, potentially slowing down and, well, politicizing certain regulatory actions. What else about existing rules? Does the bill try to roll back or review regulations
already in effect.
Yes, it does. Section 812 introduces a new process for review of rules currently in effect. Here's how it works. If Congress has not enacted a joint resolution of approval for an eligible rule, defined as a major rule already in effect as of the bill's enactment date within 5 years, that rule will automatically sunset.
Sunset, meaning it just expired.
Exactly, it expires. This creates a powerful, systematic mechanism to review and potentially eliminate older regulations. It effectively forces agencies and Congress to reevaluate their necessity and impact. The Comptroller General is also mandated to study the number and total estimated economic cost of all rules and major rules currently in effect. That's Section 8001E. It aims to provide an overarching, data-driven assessment of the regulatory burden across the federal government.
So it's not just about new rules, but a systematic review and a potential sunset of existing ones with an economic lens. This could have broad impacts across industries. Now, moving to government operations under Title IX, what's changing for federal employees and the structure of the civil service?
Title IX proposes significant changes to federal employee benefits and, notably, their employment status. Section 9001 increases federal employees' retirement system, or FERS, employee contribution requirements for those retiring on or after January 2027. More specifically, it shifts the average pay calculation, which is critical for determining annuity amounts, from a 3-year average to a 5-year average.
Longer averaging period.
Right. This means that the annuity, the annual retirement payment, will likely be based on a slightly lower average salary. It could result in slightly lower annuities for future federal retirees, as their highest earning years might be averaged over a longer period.
So, increased contributions and a longer averaging period for retirement pay. This will affect future federal retirees. What about at-will employment for certain positions? This could be a profound shift for the civil service.
Yes, Section 9002 establishes an option for individuals initially appointed to a covered position, think political appointees, senior executive service members, intelligence senior level positions after the enactment date, to make an irrevocable election to be employed on an at-will basis.
A will, meaning
they could be subject to adverse action, including removal, without notice or right to appeal, by the head of the agency at which the individual is employed for good cause, bad cause, or no cause at all.
Wow. No appeal.
That's what it says. This dramatically alters job protections for these senior roles, making them much more politically responsive and potentially vulnerable to changes in administration. It's a significant shift from the traditional merit-based system towards a more politically accountable structure for senior federal leaders.
That's a profound change, potentially making senior federal positions much more politically responsive to the administration in power. What about the Merit Systems Protection Board, which oversees federal employee appeals and federal health benefits?
Section 9003 introduces a filing fee for claims or appeals submitted to the Merit Systems Protection Board, the MSPB. That's the independent agency that hears appeals of federal employees. This fee would be equal to the filing fee for a civil action in federal court. Now, the fee would be returned if the individual is the prevailing party, but it does create an initial financial hurdle for federal employees seeking to appeal adverse actions.
Okay, a filing fee for appeals.
Right. But there are important exceptions for special counsel actions and whistleblower protection claims, ensuring those critical areas aren't hindered by fees. And on federal health benefits, in Section 9006, the bill mandates annual audits of eligibility and enrollment for federal employee health plans. It requires the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, to retain data for 6 years post-enrollment and refers instances of fraud to the Inspector General. Funding is provided for these audits and related activities, aiming to improve the integrity and reduce waste in federal employee health plans.
So, new financial hurdles for appeals and increased scrutiny on federal employee health benefits. These sections certainly aim to reshape accountability and management within the federal government, from how regulations are approved to how federal employees are hired and retained. Let's turn now to how we move around and how goods are transported, which is, central to our economy. Title X, Transportation and Infrastructure, lays out some key directives. What's new or significantly changed for the Coast Guard and maritime security?
The bill appropriates a very significant amount, $16.5 billion, for the acquisition, sustainment, improvement, and operation of United States Coast Guard assets for fiscal year 2025. That's Section 1001.
$16.5 billion for the Coast Guard.
Yes. a massive investment. It includes specific allocations for modernizing their fleet cutters, patrol boats, aviation assets, and improving their command control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities, C4ISR, as well as shore infrastructure. There's also dedicated funding for Arctic security cutters and domestic icebreakers, recognizing the growing strategic importance of the Arctic region for national security and commerce.
Right, the Arctic.
And interestingly, it allows for entities other than the Coast Guard to contract for their acquisition, procurement, or construction. That could potentially accelerate fleet modernization by leveraging external resources.
So a major investment in strengthening maritime capabilities, especially in the strategically vital Arctic. And I see a new authority to order selected reserves to active duty. How does that change the Coast Guard's operational flexibility?
Yes, Section 130.2 authorizes the Commandant of the Coast Guard to order any member of the selected reserve to active duty without their consent for up to 270 days within any 365-day period.
Without consent?
Without consent for pre-planned missions in support of Coast Guard requirements. This is a notable shift. It expands the Coast Guard's ability to augment its active forces during specific operations or emergencies, like natural disaster responses or increased maritime security needs. It offers significant operational flexibility that the Coast Guard might not have had before, provided it doesn't degrade the readiness of other reserve components.
That's a notable change in how the Coast Guard can deploy its reserve forces. Now, something that could impact many of our listeners directly, especially those driving newer vehicles, motor vehicle fees. What's this about a new federal registration fee on motor vehicles?
This is a significant new proposal in Section 100.04, and it directly impacts consumers. It mandates a new annual registration fee for certain motor vehicles, which would be collected by state motor vehicle departments and then remitted to the Federal Highway Administration. The fee would be $250 for covered electric vehicles and $100 for covered hybrid vehicles.
$250 for EVs, $100 for hybrids, collected by states.
Yes. And what's really impactful here is that states failing to comply with these collection and remittance requirements would face withholding of their federal highway apportionment funds, specifically 125% of the amount required to be remitted. This creates a very strong financial incentive for states to implement and enforce this new federal fee collection.
A federal registration fee for electric and hybrid vehicles that's a direct impact on consumers and a new revenue stream for the Highway Trust Fund. Why are these vehicles being singled out for this new fee? What's the rationale?
Well, this policy is often framed as a way to address a growing funding challenge for highway maintenance. Electric and hybrid vehicles consume less or, in the case of EVs, no gasoline. This means they contribute less or nothing to gas tax revenue, which has historically been the primary source of funding for the Highway Trust Fund, the main federal account for highways and mass transit.
The gas tax issue.
Exactly. The bill explicitly states that amounts accrued from this new fee shall be deposited into the Highway Trust Fund. That's Section 1005. So it's a clear policy to ensure these vehicles, despite their environmental benefits, still contribute to the upkeep of the nation's roads and bridges. Grants are also provided to state motor vehicle departments to help them implement the collection process, with $104 million available until September 30, 2029 for this purpose.
So a clear policy to address funding for infrastructure in the age of alternative fuel vehicles, ensuring that funding mechanisms adapt to changing vehicle technologies. Are there any rescissions of prior funding here? Perhaps from recent infrastructure initiatives?
Yes, the bill does include provisions to rescind unobligated balances from several programs in Section 1008. These include funds for materials for federal building assistance in Section 1008 and General Services Administration Emerging Technologies in Section 1008. These funds were originally allocated under Public Law 117-169, which was the Inflation Reduction Act.
More IRA funds being pulled back.
Yes. This indicates a strategic redirection or termination of certain prior funding initiatives in infrastructure and technology, aligning with broader budgetary priorities and potentially signaling a shift away from some previously funded programs.
It seems like a comprehensive approach to modernizing transportation infrastructure funding and control, from strengthening our Coast Guard to rethinking how we pay for our roads in an era of evolving vehicle technology. Finally, let's dive into the massive Title 11, which falls under the Committee on Ways and Means. This is where most of the sweeping tax code changes live, affecting individuals, families, and businesses alike. What's the big picture for families and workers under this section, particularly regarding income and capital gains taxes?
Yeah, Title 11 is incredibly comprehensive. It's truly a centerpiece of this bill, with implications for nearly every American taxpayer. Part 1, permanently preventing tax hikes, aims to solidify certain tax rates. For example, Section 11,001 permanently extends the 2017 income tax rates. Section 11,002 permanently sets the maximum 20% capital gains rate,
making the 2017 rates permanent. Okay.
Yes, these are foundational changes to the tax structure, making permanent certain rates from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which are otherwise set to expire. However, it's not all about extensions. Section 11,003 also terminates the deduction for personal exemptions for taxable years beginning after December 35, 2025.
Terminating personal exemptions.
Yes. For many households, this would effectively raise their taxable income even if their rates remain the same.
Permanently extending existing tax rates and capital gains, that's a big deal for long-term financial planning. But losing the personal exemption offsets some of that. What about the child tax credit? That's a very popular provision that has seen significant changes in recent years.
Section 11,004 extends and enhances the child tax credit, which is a critical support for many families. For taxable years beginning after December 31, 2023, the maximum credit is increased to $2,500 per qualifying child for 2024 through 2028. Then it reverts to $2,000 for subsequent years.
$2,500 for a few years, then back to $2,000.
Right. And a critical new requirement is that a Social Security number is now mandatory for the child to claim the credit. That's outlined in Section 11,004. This was previously not universally required for all refundable portions of the credit.
Ah, the SSN requirement. That's key.
It is. Additionally, the credit becomes fully refundable, meaning even families with little or no tax liability could receive the full amount. This change, particularly the SSN requirement, could significantly impact many families, especially those who previously claimed the credit without an SSN for all their children.
So a higher credit, but a new Social Security number requirement, which narrows eligibility for some. What about new deductions or exclusions that might come as surprising benefits for many workers and consumers? Like for tips, overtime, or even car loan interest?
Yeah, this raises an interesting question about unexpected and rather specific forms of tax relief. These are certainly surprising facts within such a broad bill. Section 110101 proposes no tax on tips. It explicitly excludes the total amount of tips reported by an employee from gross income for taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2024.
No tax on tips, really?
That's what it proposes. It could be a significant benefit for workers in service industries. Similarly, Section 110102 proposes no tax on overtime for qualified overtime compensation received for services performed after December 31st, 2024, up to $4,000 annually.
Up to $4,000 of overtime, tax-free.
Right. A direct incentive for workers to take on additional hours. And perhaps most surprisingly, Section 111104 offers no tax on car loan interest for qualified passenger vehicle loan interest for taxable years 2024 through 2028, up to $2,500 annually.
Tax-free car loan interest.
Up to $2,500 a year. An applicable passenger vehicle is broadly defined, but it must have its final assembly in the United States. That subtly links this tax benefit to domestic manufacturing. These are very targeted tax breaks designed to put more money directly into the pockets of many everyday workers and consumers.
No tax on tips, overtime, or car loan interest. Those are very specific and surprising benefits for many workers and consumers, especially those in the middle and working classes. What other credits are being enhanced or extended to specifically benefit families and encourage certain employer behaviors?
The bill continues its focus on family support. It enhances the employer-provided child care credit in Section 110105, making it more attractive for businesses to offer child care benefits to their employees by providing a more generous tax credit. It also extends and enhances the paid family and medical leave credit in Section 110106. It makes the latter available for not less than 6 months of employment or on an annualized basis for part-time employees, which broadens its applicability.
Okay, expanding those credits.
Yes. And the adoption credit is also enhanced in Section 110107, providing more financial support for adoptive families. Taken together, these are really a package of tax benefits aimed at directly supporting families and encouraging employers to offer more generous benefits related to child care and family leave.
So a clear package of tax benefits aimed at supporting families and encouraging certain employer behaviors. Now, what's this about MAGA accounts and education savings? That sounds like a completely new type of savings vehicle.
This is indeed a brand new type of tax-advantaged account introduced in Section 11101111, officially named My American Growth Accounts, or MAGI accounts.
MAGI accounts, okay.
These are tax-exempt trusts or custodial accounts designed for individuals under 25 years of age with an annual contribution limit of $5,000. The key benefit is that distributions from these accounts are entirely tax-free if used for qualified expenses.
And what are qualified expenses?
They are defined very broadly to include a wide range of educational costs. Higher education expenses like college tuition, post-secondary credentialing, including occupational licenses and apprenticeships, and even elementary and secondary education expenses.
Wow, K-12 included.
Yes. There are rules about excess distributions and a penalty for duplicate accounts to prevent abuse. This could be a significant and flexible tool for long-term educational planning, offering tax-free growth and withdrawals across various educational paths, from K-12 schooling to professional certifications and traditional higher education.
A new super savings account for education, quite broad in what it covers. That could be a significant tool for long-term educational planning. What about for rural America and Main Street businesses? Are there specific tax incentives aimed at them?
Yes. Part 2 of Subtitle B focuses on stimulating investment in these crucial areas. It extends the special depreciation allowance for certain property in Section 1111-101. This allows businesses to immediately deduct 100% of the cost of certain property placed in service before January 20th, 2025. It then phases out to 0% by 2028. This provides immediate expensing for business investments, encouraging companies to purchase new equipment.
Bonus depreciation extension.
Right. It also introduces a special depreciation allowance for qualified production properties in Section 111-101. This allows 100% expensing for non-residential real property used in manufacturing and production, provided it's constructed after January 19, 2025, and placed in service by January 1st, 2033. This is a powerful incentive for domestic manufacturing and investment in physical infrastructure.
So clear incentives for domestic manufacturing and investment, and I see a renewal and enhancement of opportunity zones as well. Those have been a point of discussion in recent years.
Yes. Section 111-102 allows the Secretary of the Treasury to designate additional qualified opportunity zones with a specific priority for rural areas. This aims to reignite the program's original intent to drive investment into economically distressed communities.
Focusing on rural opportunity zones.
Exactly. It also enhances the benefits for qualified rural opportunity funds, requiring substantially all tangible property to be located in a rural opportunity zone to qualify for the maximum tax benefits. Furthermore, there are detailed information reporting requirements for qualified opportunity funds and businesses, tracking metrics like job creation, poverty reduction, and other economic indicators. This renewed focus aims to direct investment and economic development specifically to distressed areas, particularly in rural communities, with a stronger emphasis on accountability for the results.
So a renewed focus on directing investment to distressed areas, particularly rural ones, with an added layer of accountability. What about other business tax changes? Perhaps for specific industries?
The bill increases dollar limitations for expensing of certain depreciable business assets in Section 111-103. This allows small and medium-sized businesses to deduct more of their investment costs immediately, encouraging capital expenditure. It also repeals the excise tax on indoor tanning services in Section 111-106.
Repealing the tanning tax.
Okay. Yes. More specifically targeted for rural areas, Section 111-107 introduces an exclusion of interest on loans secured by rural or agricultural real property. This allows qualified lenders to exclude 25% of interest received on such loans made before January 1st, 2029.
Okay, an incentive for rural lending.
Right. It's a direct tax incentive for financial institutions to increase lending in rural and agricultural sectors designed to stimulate investment and growth in those vital parts of the economy.
Very targeted incentives for specific sectors, indicating a granular approach to economic stimulus. Now let's get to some of the more impactful and potentially controversial tax policy changes, especially around energy tax credits and the state and local tax, or SALT-TEC, because these are areas that have seen a lot of debate recently.
Yes. Subtitle C, titled Termination of Energy Tax Credits and Other Measures, is indeed crucial and represents a significant policy reversal. Section 11-12-11 and subsequent sections terminate numerous energy tax credits that were recently established in the Inflation Reduction Act.
Terminating IRA energy credits.
With any of them, yes. This includes popular provisions like the Clean Vehicle Credits, the Energy Efficient Home Improvement Credit, the Residential Clean Energy Credit, and the new Energy Efficient Home Credit. These terminations generally apply to property placed in service after December 31st, 2024.
Okay, pretty soon then.
Yes. Many production and investment credits for clean energy facilities, like the Clean Electricity Production Credit and the Investment Credit, are also phased out or restricted, particularly for facilities placed in service after December 31st, 2028. And there are additional restrictions tied to prohibited foreign entities in Sections 1112-2008, 1112-2009, and 1112, and 112013. This is a major pivot on energy policy, effectively removing or phasing out many of the green energy incentives that were
Mr. Johnson, aye. Aye. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Mr. Lee, Mr. Lee, aye.
The yeas are 51, the nays are 49. The motion is agreed to. The nays are 49. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the bill. The clerk will report the bill.
Calendar number 107, H.R. 1. Calendar number 107, reconciliation pursuant to Title 2 of reconciliation pursuant to Title 2 of H. Conres 14.
Call up amendment number 2360.
The clerk will report.
The senator from South Dakota, Mr. Thune, proposes an amendment number 2360.
Mr. President, I ask consent the reading be dispensed with.
Reserving the right to object.
Is there...
And I will object. Senate Republicans are scrambling to pass a radical bill released to the public in the dead of night, praying the American people don't realize what's in it. If Senate
We do a little trolling. It's called we do a little trolling.
What's in this bill, then Democrats are going to force this chamber to read it from start to finish. I object.
Objections heard? All right. The clerk will read the amendment.
Strike all after the enacting clause and insert the following. Section 1, short title. This act may be cited as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Section 2, Table of Contents. The table of contents of this act is as follows. Section 1, short title. Section 2, Table of Contents. Title 1, Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. Subtitle A, Nutrition. Section 10101, reevaluation of thrifty food plan. Section 10102, modifications to SNAP work requirements for able-bodied adults. Section 10103, availability of standard utility allowances based on receipt on energy assistance. Section 10104, restrictions on internet expenses. Section 10105, matching funds requirements. Section 10106, administrative cost sharing. Section 10107, National Education and Obesity Prevention Grant Programs. Section 10108, Alien SNAP Eligibility. Subtitle B, Forestry. Section 10201, Rescissions of Amounts for Forestry. Subtitle C, Commodities. Section 10301, Effective Reference Price. Section 10302, Base Acres. Section 10303, Producer Election. Section 10304, Price Loss Coverage. Section 10305, Agriculture Risk Coverage. Section 10306, Equitable Treatment of Certain Entities. Section 10307, Payment Limitations. Section 10308, Adjusted Gross Income Limitation. Section 10309, Marketing Loans. Section 10310, Repayment of Marketing Loans. Section 10311, Economic Adjustment Assistance for Textile Mills. Section 10312, Sugar Price Updates. Section 10313, Dairy Policy Updates. Section 10314, Implementation. Subtitle D, Disaster Assistance Programs. Section 10401, Supplemental Agriculture Disaster Assistance. Subtitle E, Crop Insurance. Section 10501, Beginning Farmer and Rancher Benefit. Section 10502, Area-Based Crop Insurance Coverage and Affordability. Section 10503, Administrative and Operative Expense Adjustments. Section 10504, Premium Support. Section 10505, Program Compliance and Integrity. Section 10506, Reviews, Compliance and Integrity. Section 10507, Poultry Insurance Pilot Program. Subtitle F, Additional Investments in Rural America. Section 10601, Conservation. Section 10602, Supplemental Agriculture Trade Promotion Program. Section 10603, Nutrition. Section 10604, Research. Section 10605, Energy. Section 10606, Horticulture. Section 10607, Miscellaneous. Title II, Committee on Armed Services. Section 2001, Enhancement of Department of Defense Resources for Improving the Quality of Life for Military Personnel. Section 20002, Enhancement of Department of Defense Resources for Shipbuilding. Section 20003, Enhancement of Department of Defense Resources for Integrated Air and Missile Defense. Just write pending on that. Get them to send it out. Section 20004, Enhancement of Department of Defense Resources for Munitions and Defense Supply Chain Resiliency. Section 20005, Enhancement of Department of Defense Resources for Scaling Low-Cost Weapons into Production. Section 20006, Enhancement of Department of Defense Resources for Improving the Efficiency and Cybersecurity of the Department of Defense. Section 20007, Enhancement of Department of Defense Resources for Air Superiority. Section 20008, Enhancement of Resources for Nuclear Forces. Section 20009, Enhancement of Department of Defense Resources to improve capabilities of United States Indo-Pacific Command. Section 20010, Enhancement of Department of Defense Resources for improving the readiness of the Department of Defense. Section 20011, improving Department of Defense border support and counter-drug missions. Section 20012, Department of Defense oversight. Section 20013, military construction projects authorized. Section 20014, multi-year operational plan. Title III, Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. Section 30001, funding cap for the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection. Section 30002, rescission of funds for green and resilient retrofit program for multifamily housing. Section 30003, Securities and Exchange Commission Reserve Fund. Section 30004, Appropriations for Defense Production Act. Title IV, Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. Section 40001, Coast Guard Mission Readiness. Section 40002, Spectrum Auctions. Section 40003, Air Traffic Control Improvements. Section 40004, Space Launch and Reentry Licensing and Permitting User Fees. Section 40005, Mars Missions, Artemis Mission, and Moon to Mars Program. Section 40006, Corporate Average Fuel Economy Civil Penalties. Section 40007, Payment for Lease of Metropolitan Washington Airports. Section 40008, Rescission of certain amounts for the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. Section 40009, Reduction in annual transfers to Travel Promotion Fund. Section 40010, Treatment of unobligated funds for alternative fuel and low-emission aviation technology. Section 40011, rescission of amounts appropriated for Public Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund. Section 40012, support for artificial intelligence under the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program. Title V, Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. Subtitle A, Oil and Gas Leasing. Section 50101, Onshore Oil and Gas Leasing. Section 50102, Offshore Oil and Gas Leasing. Section 50103, Royalties on Extracted Methane. Section 50104, Alaska Oil and Gas Leasing. Section 50105, National Petroleum Reserve, Alaska. Subtitle B, Mining. Section 50201, Coal Leasing. Section 50202, Coal Royalty. Section 50203, Leases for Known Recoverable Coal Resources. Section 50204, Authorization to Mine Federal Coal. Subtitle C, Lands. Section 50301. Section 50302, Timber Sales and Long-Term Contracting for the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. Section 50303, Renewable Energy Fees on Federal Land. Section 50304, Renewable Energy Revenue Sharing. Section 50305, Rescission of National Park Service and Bureau of Land Management Funds. Section 50306, Celebrating America's 250th Anniversary. Subtitle D, Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Section 50401, Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Section 50402, Repeals Rescissions. Section 50403, Energy Dominance Financing. Section 50404, Transformational Artificial Intelligence Models. Subtitle E, Water. Section 50501, Water Conveyance and Surface Water Storage Enhancement. Title VI, Committee on Environment and Public Works. Section 60001, Rescission of Funding for Clean Heavy-Duty Vehicles. Section 60002, Repeal of Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Section 60003, Rescission of Funding for Diesel Emission Reductions. Section 60004, Rescission of Funding to Address Air Pollution. Section 60005, Rescission of Funding to Address Air Pollution at Schools. Section 60006, rescission of funding for low emissions electricity program. Section 60007, rescission of funding for Section 211.0 of the Clean Air Act. Section 60008, rescission of funding for implementation of the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act. Section 60009, rescission of funding for enforcement, technology, and public information. Section 60010, rescission of funding for greenhouse gas corporate reporting. Section 60011, rescission of funding for environmental product declaration assistance. Section 60012, rescission of funding for methane emissions and waste reduction incentive program for petroleum and natural gas systems. Section 60013, rescission of funding for greenhouse gas, air pollution plans, and implementation grants. Section 60014, rescission of funding for Environmental Protection Agency efficient, accurate, and timely reviews. Section 60015, rescission of funding for low embodied carbon labeling for construction materials. Section 60016, rescission of funding for environmental and climate justice block grants. Section 60017, rescission of funding for ESA recovery plans. Section 60018, rescission of funding for environmental and climate data collection. Section 60019, rescission of neighborhood access and equity grant program. Section 60020, rescission of funding for federal building assistance. Section 60021, rescission of funding for low-carbon materials for federal buildings. Section 60022, rescission of funding for GSA emerging and sustainable technologies. Section 60023, rescission of environmental review implementation funds. Section 60024, rescission of low-carbon transportation materials grants. Section 60025, John F. Kennedy Center for Performing Arts. Section 60026, project sponsor opt-in fees for environmental services. Title VII, Finance. Subtitle A, Tax. Section 70001, references to the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, etc. Chapter 1, providing permanent tax relief for middle-class families and workers. Section 70101, extension and enhancement of reduced rates. Section 70102, extension and enhancement of increased standard deduction. Section 70103, termination of deduction of personal exemptions other than temporary senior deduction. Section 70104, extension and enhancements of increased child tax credit. Section 70105, extension and enhancement of deduction for qualified business income. Section 70106, extension and enhancement of increased estate and gift tax exemption amounts. Section 70107, extension of increased alternative minimum tax exemption amounts and modification of phase-out thresholds. Section 70108, extension and modification of limitation on deduction for qualified residence interest. Section 70109, extension and modification of limitation on casualty loss deduction. Section 70110, termination of miscellaneous itemized deductions other than educator expenses. Section 70111, limitation on tax benefits of itemized deductions. Section 70112, extension and modification of qualified transportation fringe benefits. Section 70113, extension and modification of limitation on deduction and exclusions for moving expenses. Section 70114, extension and modification of limitation on wagering losses. Section 70115, extension and enhancement of increased limitation on contributions to ABLE accounts. Section 70116, extension and enhancement of savers credit allowed for able contributors. Section 70117, extension of rollovers for qualified tuition programs to able accounts permitted. Section 70118, extension of treatment of certain individuals performing services in the Sinai Peninsula and enhancement to include additional areas. Section 70119, extension and modification and exclusion from gross income of student loans discharged on account of death or disability. Section 70120, limitation on individual deductions for certain state and local taxes, etc. Chapter 2, delivering on presidential priorities to provide new middle-class tax relief. Section 70201, no tax on tips. Section 70202, no tax on overtime. Section 70203, no tax on car loan investment. Section 70204, Trump accounts and contribution pilot program. Chapter 3, establishing certainty and competitiveness for American.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
A, permanent U.S. business tax reform and boosting domestic investment. Section 70301, full expensing for certain business property. Section 70302, full expensing of domestic research and experimental expenditures. Section 70303, modification of limitation on business interest. Section 70304, extension and enhancement of paid family and medical leave credit. Section 70305, exceptions from limitations on deduction for business meals. Section 70306, increased dollar limitations for expensing of certain depreciable business assets. Section 70307, special depreciation allowance for qualified production property. Section 70308, enhancement of advanced manufacturing investment credit. Section 70309, spaceports are treated like airports under exempt facility bond rules. Subtitle B, permanent America First international tax reforms. Part 1, foreign tax credit. Section 70311, modifications related to foreign tax credit limitation. Section 70312, modifications to determination of deemed paid credit for taxes properly attributable to tested income. Section 70313, sourcing certain income from the sale of inventory produced in the United States. Part 2, foreign-derived deduction eligible income and net CFC tested income. Section 70321, modification of deduction for foreign-derived deduction eligible income and net CFC tested income. Section 70322, determination of deduction eligible income. Section 70323, rules related to deemed intangible income. Part 3, base erosion minimum tax. Section 70331, extension and modification of base erosion minimum tax amount. Part 4, business interest limitation. Section 70341, coordination of business interest limitation and interest capitalization provisions. Section 70342, definition of adjusted taxable income for business interest limitation. Part 5, other international tax reforms. Section 70351, permanent extension of look-through rule for related controlled foreign corporations. Section 70352, repeal of election for 1 month deferral and determination of taxable year of specified foreign corporations. Section 70353, restoration of limitation on downward attribution of stock ownership in applying constructive ownership rules. Section 70354, modification to pro rata share rules. Chapter 4, investing in American families, communities, and small businesses. Subchapter A, permanent investments in families and children. Section 70401, enhancement of employer-provided child care credit. Section 70402, enhancement of adoption credit. Section 70403, recognizing Indian tribal governments for purposes of determining whether a child has special needs for purposes of the adoption credit. Section 70404, enhancement of the Dependent Care Assistance Program. Section 70405, enhancement of Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit. Subtitle B, permanent investments in students and reforms to tax-exempt institutions. Section 70411, tax credit for contributions of individuals to scholarship-granting organizations. Section 70412, exclusion for employer payments of student loans. Section 70413, additional expenses treated as qualified higher education expenses for purpose of 529 accounts. Section 70414, certain post-secondary credentializing expenses treated as qualified higher education expenses for purposes of 529 accounts. Section 70415, modification of excise tax on investment income of certain private colleges and universities. Section 70416, expanding application of tax on excess compensation within tax-exempt organizations. Subchapter C, permanent investments in community development. Section 70421, permanent renewal and enhancement of opportunity zones. Section 70422, permanent enhancement of low-income housing tax credit. Section 70423, permanent extension of new markets tax credit. Section 70424, permanent and expanded reinstatement of partial deduction for charitable contributions of individuals who do not elect to itemize. Section 70425, 0.5% floor on deduction of contributions made by individuals. Section 70426, 1% floor on deduction of charitable contributions made by corporations. Section 70427, permanent increase in limitations on cover over of tax on distilled spirits. Section 70428, nonprofit community development activities in remote native languages. Section 70429, adjustment of charitable deduction for certain expenses incurred in support of Native Alaskan subsistent whaling. Section 70430, exception to percentage of completion method of accounting for certain residential construction contracts. Subchapter D, permanent investments in small business and rural America. Section 70431, expansion of qualified small business stock gain exclusion. Section 70432, repeal of revision to de minimis rules for third-party network transactions. Section 70433, increase in threshold for requiring information reporting with respect to certain payees. Section 70434, treatment of certain qualified sound recording productions. Section 70435, exclusion of interest on loans secured by rural or agricultural real property. Section 70436, reduction of transfer and manufacturing taxes for certain devices. Section 70437, treatment of capital gains from the sale of certain farmland property. Section 70438, extension of rules for treatment of certain disaster-related personal casualty losses. Chapter 5, ending Green New Deal spending, promoting America First energy, and other reforms. Subchapter A, termination of Green New Deal subsidies. Section 70501, termination of previously owned clean vehicle credit. Section 70502, termination of clean vehicle credit. Section 70503, termination of qualified commercial clean vehicles credit. Section 70504, termination of alternative fuel vehicle refueling property credit. Section 70505, termination of energy efficient home improvement credit. Section 70506, termination of residential clean energy credit. Section 70507, termination of energy efficient commercial building deduction. Section 70508, termination of new energy efficient home credit. Section 70509, termination of cost recovery for energy, property, and qualified clean energy facilities, property, and technology. Section 70510, modifications of zero-emission nuclear power production credit. Section 70511, termination of clean hydrogen production credit. Section 70512, termination and restrictions on clean electricity production credit. Section 70513, termination and restrictions on clean electricity investment credit. Section 70514, phase out and restrictions on advanced manufacturing production credit. Section 70515, restriction on the extension of advanced energy project credit program. Subchapter B, enhancement of America First energy policy. Section 70521, extension and modification of clean fuel production credit. Section 70522, restrictions on carbon oxide sequestration credit. Section 70523, intangible drilling and development costs taken into account for purposes of computing adjusted financial statement income. Section 70524, income from hydrogen storage, carbon capture, advanced nuclear, hydropower, and geothermal energy added to qualifying income of certain publicly traded partnerships. Section 70525, allow for payments to certain individuals who die fuel. Subchapter C, other reforms. Section 70531, modifications to de minimis entry privilege for commercial shipments. Chapter 6, enhancing deduction and income tax credit, guardrails, and other reforms. Section 70601, modification and extension of limitation on excess business losses of non-corporate taxpayers. Section 70602, treatment of payments for partnerships to partners for property or services. Section 70603, excessive employee remuneration from controlled group members and allocation of deduction. Section 70604, third-party litigation funding reforms. Section 70605, excise tax on certain remittance transfers. Section 70606, enforcement provisions with respect to COVID-related employee retention credits. Section 70607, Social Security number requirement for American Opportunity and Lifetime Learning credits. Section 70608, Task Force on the Replacement of the Direct File. Subtitle B, Health. Chapter 1, Medicaid. Chapter A, Reducing Fraud and Improving Enrollment Processes. Section 71101, Moratorium on Implementation of Rule relating to eligibility and enrollment in Medicare savings programs. Section 71102, Moratorium on Implementation of Rule relating to eligibility and enrollment for Medicaid, CHIP, and the Basic Health Program. Section 71103, Reducing Duplicate Enrollment under the Medicaid and CHIP programs. Section 71104, Ensuring deceased individuals do not remain enrolled. Section 71105, Ensuring deceased providers do not remain enrolled. Section 71106, Payment reduction related to certain erroneous excess payments under Medicaid. Section 71107, eligibility redeterminations. Section 71108, revising home equity limit for determining eligibility for long-term care services under the Medicaid program. Section 71109, alien Medicaid eligibility. Section 71110, expansion FMAP for certain states providing payments for health care furnished to certain individuals. Section 71111, expansion of FMAP for emergency Medicaid. Subchapter B, preventing wasteful spending. Section 7112, moratorium on implementation of rule relating to staffing standards for long-term care facilities under the Medicare and Medicaid programs. Section 71113, reducing state Medicaid costs. Section 71114, prohibiting federal Medicaid and CHIP funding for certain items and services. Section 71115, federal payments to prohibited entities. Subchapter C, stopping abusive financing practices. Section 7116, sunsetting increased FMAP incentive. Section 71117, provider taxes. Section 71118, state-directed payments. Section 71119, requirements regarding waiver of uniform tax requirement for Medicaid provider tax. Section 71120, requiring budget neutrality for Medicaid demonstration projects under Section 1115. Subchapter D, increasing personal accountability. Section 71121, requirement for states to establish Medicaid community engagement requirements for certain individuals. Section 71122, modifying cost-sharing requirements for certain expansion individuals under the Medicaid program. Subchapter E, expanding access to care. Section 71123, making certain adjustments to coverage of home or community-based services under Medicaid. Section 71124, determination of FMAP for high-poverty states. Chapter 2, Medicare. Subchapter A, strengthening eligibility requirements. Section 71201, limiting Medicare coverage of certain individuals. Subchapter B, improving services for seniors. Section 71202, temporary payment, increase under the Medicare physician fee schedule to account for exceptional circumstances. Section 71203, expanding and clarifying the exclusion for orphan drugs under the drug price negotiation program. Section 71204, application of cost living adjustment to non-labor related portion for hospital outpatient department services furnished in Alaska and Hawaii. Chapter 3, health tax. Subchapter A, improving eligibility criteria. Section 71301, permitting premium tax credit only for certain individuals. Section 71302, disallowing premium tax credit during periods of Medicaid ineligibility due to alien status. Subchapter B, preventing waste, fraud, and abuse. Section 71303, requiring verification of eligibility for premium tax credit. Section 71304, disallowing premium tax credit in case of certain coverage enrolled in during special enrollment period. Section 71305, eliminating limitation on recapture of advance payment of premium tax credit. Section 71306, permanent extension of safe harbor for absence of deductible for telehealth services. Section 71307, allowance of bronze and catastrophic plans and connection with health savings accounts. Section 71308, treatment of direct primary care service arrangements. Chapter 4, protecting rural hospitals and providers. Section 71401, Rural Health Transformation Program. Subtitle C, Increase in Debt Limit. Section 72001, Modification of Limitation on the Public Debt. Title 8, Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. Subtitle A, Exemption of Certain Assets. Section 80001, Exemption of Certain Assets. Subtitle B, Loan Limits. Section 81001, Establishment of Loan Limits for Graduate and Professional Students and Parent Borrowers, Termination of Graduate and Professional Plus Loans. Subtitle C, Loan Repayment. Section 82001, Loan Repayment. Section 82002, Deferment, Forbearance. Section 82003, Loan Rehabilitation. Section 82004, Public Service Loan Forgiveness. Section 82005, Student Loan Servicing. Subtitle D, Pell Grants. Section 83001, Eligibility. Section 83002, Workforce Pell Grants. Section 83003, Pell Shortfall. Section 83004, Federal Pell Grants Exclusion Relating to Other Grant Aid. Subtitle E, Accountability. Section 84001, Ineligibility Based on Low Earnings Outcomes. Subtitle F, Regulatory Relief. Section 85001, Delay of Rule Relating to Borrower Defense to Repayment. Section 85002, Delay of Rule Relating to Closed School Discharges. Subtitle G, Limitation on Authority. Section 86001, Limitation on Proposing or Issuing Regulations and Executive Actions. Subtitle H, Garden of Heroes. Section 87001, Garden of Heroes.
Subtitle 1, Office of Refugee Resettlement, Section 88001, Potential Sponsor Vetting for Unaccompanied Alien Children Appropriation. Title 9, Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. Subtitle A, Homeland Security Provisions. Section 90001, Border Infrastructure and Wall System. Section 90002, U.S. Customs and Border Protection Personnel, Fleet Vehicles and Facilities. Section 90003, Detention Capacity. Section 90004, Border Security, Technology, and Screening. Section 90005, State and Local Assistance. Section 90006, Presidential Residence Protection. Section 90007, Department of Homeland Security Appropriations for Border Support. Subtitle B, Governmental Affairs Provisions. Section 90101, FEHB Improvements. Section 90102, Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. Section 90103, Appropriation for the Office of Management and Budget. Title 10, Committee on the Judiciary. Subtitle A, Immigration and Law Enforcement Matters. Part 1, Immigration Fees. Section 100001, Applicability of the Immigration Laws. Section 100002, Asylum Fee. Section 100003, Employment Authorization Document Fees. Section 100004, Immigration Parole Fee. Section 100005, Special Immigrant Juvenile Fee. Section 100006, Temporary Protected Status Fee. Section 100007, Visa Integrity Fee. Section 100008, Form I-94 Fee. Section 100009, Annual Asylum Fee. Section 100010, Fee relating to renewal and extension of employment authorization for parolees. Section 10011, fee relating to renewal or extension of employment authorization for asylum applicants. Section 10012, fee relating to renewal and extension of employment authorization for aliens granted temporary protected status. Section 10013, fees relating to applications for adjustment of status. Section 10014, electronic system for travel authorization fee. Section 10015, electronic visa update system fee. Section 10016, fee for aliens ordered removed in absentia. Section 10017, inadmissible alien apprehension fee. Section 10018, amendment to authority to apply for asylum. Part 2, immigration and law enforcement funding. Section 10051, appropriation for the Department of Homeland Security. Section 10052, appropriation for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Section 10053, appropriation for federal law enforcement training centers. Section 10054, appropriation for the Department of Justice. Section 10055, bridging immigration-related deficits experienced nationwide reimbursement fund. Section 10056, appropriation for the Bureau of Prisons. Section 10057, appropriation for the United States Secret Service. Subtitle B, Judiciary Matters. Section 1000101, appropriation to the Administrative Office of the United States Courts. Section 1000102, appropriation to the Federal Judicial Center. Subtitle C, Radiation Exposure Compensation Matters. Section 1000201, extension of fund. Section 1000202, claims relating to atmospheric testing. Section 1000203, claims relating to uranium mining. Section 1000205, limitations on claims. Title I, Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. Subtitle A, Nutrition. Section 10101, reevaluation of Thrifty Food Plan. A, in general, Section 3 of the Food and Nutrition Act of 2008, 7 U.S.C. 2012 is amended by striking subsection U and inserting the following. U, Thrifty Food Plan. 1, in general, the term Thrifty Food Plan means a diet required to feed a family of 4 persons consisting of a man and a woman ages 20 through 50, a child ages 6 through 8, and a child ages 9 through 11, using the items and quantities of food described in the report of the Department of Agriculture entitled Thrifty Food Plan 2021. And each successor report updated pursuant to this subsection, subject to the conditions that A, the relevant market baskets of the Thrifty Food Plan shall only be changed pursuant to paragraph 4. B, the cost of the Thrifty Food Plan shall be the basis for uniform allotments for all households regardless of the actual composition of the household. And C, the cost of the Thrifty Food Plan may only be adjusted in accordance with this subsection. 2, household adjustments. The Secretary shall make household adjustments using the following ratios of household size as a percentage of the maximum 4-person allotment. A, for a one-person household, 30%. B, for a 2-person household, 55%. C, for a 3-person household, 79%. D, for a 4-person household, 100%. E, for a 5-person household, 119%. F, for a 6-person household, 143%. G, for a 7-person household, 158%. H, for an 8-person household, 180%. I, for a household of 9 persons or more, an additional 22% per person, which additional percentage shall not total more
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here in the Oval Office, one of the great places of the world, as we make a historic announcement about the Golden Dome Missile Defense Shield. That's something we want, and Ronald Reagan wanted it many years ago, but they didn't have the technology, but it's something we're going to have. We're going to have it at the highest level. I want to thank Secretary Hegseth, who's been fantastic, and Secretary Rubio, and Space Force Vice Chief of Space Operations, General Mike Gutlein. I also want to recognize Senators Dan Sullivan, Kevin Kramer, and Jim Banks, fantastic senators, great talents, great political talents, and people that love our country. In the campaign, I promised the American people that I would build a cutting-edge missile defense shield to protect our homeland from the threat of foreign missile attack. And that's what we're doing. Today, I'm pleased to announce that we have officially selected an architecture for this state-of-the-art system that will deploy next-generation technologies across the land, sea, and space, including space-based sensors and interceptors. And Canada has called us, and they want to be a part of it. So we'll be talking to them. They want to have protection also. So as usual, we help Canada do the best we can. This design for the Golden Dome will integrate with our existing defense capabilities and should be fully operational before the end of my term. So we'll have it done in about 3 years. Once fully constructed, the Golden Dome will be capable of intercepting missiles even if they are launched from other sides of the world and even if they are launched from space. And we will have the best system ever built. As you know, we helped Israel with theirs, and it was very successful, and now we have technology that's even far advanced from that, but including.
If you want an incredibly efficient way to cool and heat your home all summer and winter long, then you're going to want to take a close
Indian, as such terms are defined in paragraphs 13 and 28 of Section 4 of the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, or G, a California Indian described in Section 809A of the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act. B, standardizing enforcement. Section 604 of the Food Nutrition Act of 2008, 7 USC 201504 is amended 1 in subparagraph A by striking clause 2 and inserting the following. 2, is in a non-contiguous state and has an unemployment rate that is at or above 1.5 times the national unemployment rate, 8%, and 2, by adding at the end the following. C, definition of non-contiguous state. 1, in general, in this paragraph, the term non-contiguous state means a state that is not one of the contiguous 48 states or the District of Columbia. 2, exclusion. The term non-contiguous state does not include Guam or the Virgin Islands of the United States. C, waiver for non-contiguous states. Section 60 of the Food Nutrition Act of 2008, 7 USC 20150 is amended 1, by redesignating paragraph 7 as paragraph 8, and 2, by inserting after paragraph 6 the following. 7, exemption for non-contiguous states. A, definition of non-contiguous state. 1, in general, in this paragraph, the term non-contiguous state means a state that is not one of the contiguous 48 states or the District of Columbia. 2, exclusions. In this paragraph, the term non-contiguous state does not include Guam or the Virgin Islands of the United States. B, exemption. Subject to subparagraph D, the Secretary may exempt individuals in a non-contiguous state from compliance with the requirements of paragraph 2 if 1, the state agency submits to the Secretary a request for that exemption made in such form and at such time as the Secretary may require, and including the information described in subparagraph C, and 2, the Secretary determines that based on that request, the state agency is demonstrating a good faith effort to comply with the requirements of paragraph 2. C, good faith effort determination. In determining whether a state agency is demonstrating a good faith effort or for purposes of subparagraph B2, the Secretary shall consider 1, any action taken by the state agency toward compliance with the requirements of paragraph 2, 2, any significant barriers to or challenges in meeting those requirements, including barriers or challenges relating to funding, design, development, procurement or installation of necessary systems or resources. 3, the detailed plan and timeline of the state agency for achieving full compliance with those requirements, including any milestones as defined by the Secretary. And 4, any other criteria determined appropriate by the Secretary. D, duration of exemption. 1, in general, an exemption granted under subparagraph B shall expire not later than December 31st, 2028, and may not be renewed beyond that date. 2, early termination. The Secretary may terminate an exemption granted under subparagraph B prior to that expiration date of that exemption if the Secretary determines that the state agency, 1, has failed to comply with the reporting requirements described in subparagraph E, or 2, based on the information provided pursuant to subparagraph E, failed to make continued good faith efforts towards compliance with the requirements of this subsection. E, reporting requirements. A state agency granted an exemption under subparagraph B shall submit to the Secretary 1, quarterly progress reports on the status of the state agency in achieving the milestones toward full compliance described in subparagraph C3, and 2, information on specific risks or newly identified barriers or challenges to full compliance, including the plan of the state agency to mitigate those risks, barriers, or challenges. Section